Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's really nice that you came to Poland to talk with us. And I think we're gonna have a really nice conversation. So at the beginning, maybe just tell us a few words about yourself and then what is Kinto all about.
A bit of myself, engineer by background, also from Europe, from Spain originally, but I've been in the US for many years, working mainly in the Silicon Valley sphere. Started a company in the gaming space, got acquired by Zynga many years ago, worked there for a few years, working on those really famous social games like Farmville and the likes more than 10 years ago. Then I also work in other companies in the Valley like Google, where I led that team in Google Cloud. And also I work for YC, Y Combinator, there around 2015, 2017, where I was helping them build internal products and also advising crypto founders at the time, like the OpenSea founders went through YC while I was there, and also Dharma and a few others. And then since 2017, I couldn't think of any other thing like crypto, so I left, joined OpenZeppelin as the head of product. OpenZeppelin is one of the biggest security firms and the people that created the original ERC20. And then after that, I founded an asset management protocol on Ethereum called Babylon Finance, where users could put money with their friends together and invest it in different opportunities in DeFi. For example, they could lend, they could supply collateral to Aave, borrow from it, and then stake it on, put it on Carve, and stake the LP tokens on Convex. Those kind of things. Everything was going well. We got like 50 million in TVL, but at some point we integrated this other protocol called Rari. That was a lending protocol with more than $1 billion in assets. And they eventually suffered a hack. And then some of our users that created the strategy with this protocol got affected. And then to make things worse, these people said they were going to refund. Then a month later, they changed their mind. So we told our users that everything was fine. Then because they changed their mind, then we have to tell our users, no, they changed their mind. So it kind of triggered a bank run on our deposits. And then at the same time, the Terra Luna happened, the Steve depeg. So eventually we recovered all the money for our users because eventually we forced Rari to change their mind. But then it was extremely impossible to come back from the death of the bear market. So decided to close the protocol, return all the treasury to the users. That I believe we're one of the few protocols that did so, because it's much easier to stay zombie and don't have to deal with it than closing the protocol. But at that moment is when I realized that we're not going to be able to make DeFi attractive and available for users, for financial users, if they are losing their whole net worth. They keep getting scammed, ragged, or hacked. And that kind of created the seed idea for Kinto. It's like, is this really secure layer 2 that gives you access to the best opportunities in the decentralized finance that we like to call on-chain finance, and then compose them also with the best assets that are available in traditional finance that now are called RWA. So we also make the people in financial institutions happy because the compliance departments can finally say yes to something, and then they can deploy and start to do things on chain. I know I threw a lot of stuff, so feel free to ask about anything.
Sure. So I think that because of this experience with all this hacking and a lot of things that you have to do to get your funds, your money from the other project, and then refund it to the users. Was that the reason that you started Kinto? Yeah, it's so because of that you want to do all the KYC stuff and AML.
Yeah, not only the KYC AML is honestly secondary, but it gives you really nice Sybil resistance because it's another of the safety issues that a blockchain has to deal with, because and you see it in airdrops that most of them are kind of plagued by these bot farms in many low-income countries that they just have is one guy with 200 cell phones just farming airdrops. But then the main thing, the other main feature of Kinto is that we have native account abstraction, and that means that we force every user to have a smart contract wallet. And a smart contract wallet basically gives every user the same security guarantees as the Gnosis Safe, that is the standard in security in the space, but then with really easy UI. So that's our goal, just like give every user this really secure wallet that is the Kinto wallet, and it's similar to what Coinbase released a couple months ago, but we have it since November.
Okay, so maybe let's talk more about Kinto, and in a few words, in basic, just describe us your protocol and what is it all about.
Kinto is this layer 2 designed to basically bridge the gap between traditional finance and decentralized finance. And as I said, it has these two main features. One is KYC AML integrated, but it's still done in a way that is as decentralized, as permissionless, and as privacy-oriented as possible, and also having native account abstraction. And these two features together, I think, solve the main problems of the space, that is usability, security, and transparency.
Do you think that all of these things that KYC and gonna attract a lot of users, because we know that people like to be anonymous in the internet, and I know that there is a lot of things that happening in the space, like you said, with these airdrops, but still we need to provide our identity to some third party, and then we can use your blockchain. So how do you see that? How do you think that people like us, like Dz here, gonna react to it, and is it gonna be attractive for them to share identity with some third party?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been in crypto for 9 years, and I'm the first one that doesn't like to do this. But what you need to realize is, like, there are two ways of onboarding mature capital or mature institutions on chain. One of them is waiting 7 to 10 years until institutions and governments allow zero knowledge proofs, because I believe KYC is an outdated technology. There is no reason that you should need to make a copy of your ID in order to use this protocol or that protocol, or to create an account on Coinbase. But the thing is, like, governments are really slow. So if we want to be able to onboard this financial bank from Switzerland, these institutions from Wall Street, we need to provide them a middle way right now. And we are doing it in the most privacy way conscious and respecting the ethos in the decentralization, meaning that Kinto doesn't store any data. And when you create an account on Kinto, you basically, as a user, you have the power to decide which KYC provider you trust. And we offer 3 different providers right now that are Plaid, OnFido, and Synapse. And what we do is, like, this KYC provider only stores your personal data, but they don't have your on-chain address. So even in the unlikely case that they get hacked, they couldn't be able to do the mapping. So I could say that Kinto, in a sense, is even safer, because we break this account, is safer than something like Coinbase. And many of the people here, and we all have to, in order to use crypto, first we need to create an account on an exchange. So the idea is, like, Kinto has better assurances that an exchange, and it still protects your privacy while giving you all the benefits that a Sybil Resistant chain can offer. That is, like, preventing bots, preventing farm, ensuring that the value distribution is fair across users, no fake activity, and then this provide the next safer experience, because this allows us, for example, to offer features to users like the native wallet insurance that we offer by default to all of our users.
Okay, so it should attract more these institutional players, so big guys. So how is it working for now? So do you have some big players that are building, that are trying to put some capital on your L2?
Yeah, and to address first, we're targeting both people. For retail, the value prop is, like, this is 10 times safer than any other chain. And as I said, you have wallet insurance by default. So you're protected against smart contract hacks. And then you also have this really safe wallet that you can use to access any other activity, any other opportunity that is available on Ethereum. And we pay for gas. Gas is free already on Kinto. Then on the institutional side, this is what is going to differentiate Kinto. And that's why we're not playing the game or, okay, which L2 is going to grow the quickest. And you can see it also in the way we design our mining program. We are designed to be here a long time, because this transition from being an asset class that is 2 trillion to be in an asset class that is going to be 100 trillion, it's going to take a decade to 2 decades. So we are not in a hurry. And you ask for institutions, we have been talking with a couple of them for 6-7 months, and we have been passing their compliance due diligence, their technical due diligence, their financial due diligence, and we will have really good news to share in the next couple of weeks. But so far I cannot give any names, but yes, we are talking with a few financial firms, both from the US and from Europe, and we plan to onboard them into our mining program during the September.
All right. So all that features that you have should be better and safer for the users because of the regulations and KYC and everything will be like focused to protect users and also builders. But still, we had a situation in crypto like this text. Forget the name from the USA, where was the SBF. What was the name of it? Sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, FTX.
FTX, yeah, of course, FTX. So FTX, everything was regulated, but still we had something like this. CZ from the Binance was in a jail. Dz.U, which was known from Terra, probably he's still in the jail too. So was it really be safer for everyone? Is that gonna differentiate from the other crypto? Because like I said, there is many examples that everything's supposed to be good and it is not.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, that's the difference. I mean, we don't have any license, we don't have any regular, because but what provides the security of Kinto is the technologies. We have this ethos in the blockchain space that I think is really valuable, that is don't trust, verify. Unfortunately, not everyone can do that, but we can provide the tools for everyone to be able to get as deeper as they can. And in the case of Kinto, the security comes from the building blocks, and all these building blocks and the code is public. You can see that every user in Kinto has their Kinto wallet. Their Kinto wallet is ANOSIS safe. You can see that it's non-custodial. You can see that the users can create a turnkey passkey by default that they can attach to their fingerprint on their laptop or on their mobile, and that becomes the way they sign transactions. That is extremely easy, just with a fingerprint, but under the hood it can be extremely complicated, because then you can enact policies like, okay, you need then 2 or 3 signers to send these really valuable transactions. So then you also need to connect your hardware wallet, etc., etc. And then the KYC AML basically is this layer of tooling for compliance that is going to make institutional people happy, and it's going to make for them being able to deploy capital at a scale or being able to try things on chain much easier than convince them to put money on this Aave pool or this Uniswap pool, because they don't know who else is going to be there. And it provides also these nice side properties for retail users. But in the case of SBF and FTX, I mean, the security is it was just a centralized exchange. So meaning centralized servers, users didn't have segregated accounts. It's totally different. Kinto is still fully non-custodial. We have KYC and AML tooling built into the chain, yes, but that gives us nice properties like Sybil resistance, and it gives institutional people the comfort they need to be able to do experiments on chain.
Okay, so who is your main target? Is it retail? Is it institutions to come to the chain and build stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I see it as a marketplace. You need both places. From the institutional side, we are talking with them to do 2 things. On one side, deploy capital to the opportunities that are already available. For example, there are a lot of now interest in institutional and financial firms to deploy capital to things like Athena and Stake USD. And then also for them to start doing experiments and develop and tokenize their own assets and putting them on chain, like you have seen with the BlackRock Beetle Fund, for example. And then on the retail side, we focus on security, offering this really safe experience so they can use something like to give a bit more detail here, because Kinto is not just a layer 2. You can see there's 3 different things. It's the layer 2, then it's our own wallet, and then it's also kind of like the portal. So like something like InstaDApp, and you get all the 3 at one, and you can go cross-chain, and you can get insurance by default. So it's like the safest way. In the end, we want to become like a consumer app that uses the products that are available on Kinto that offers the best from everywhere else in Ethereum, plus the only assets, the unique assets on Kinto that are on Kinto because they cannot exist anywhere else. And these are things like mortgages, these are things like bonds, these are things like liquid funds that can offer their products on Kinto. And we're going to start releasing some of these products like stocks. Right now, last week, we released stocks on chain, so people can buy Coinbase, Nvidia, or even the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF from on chain. And our vision is to combine the best digital assets, combine the best RWA assets, and offer both retail institutions the way to create portfolios and to access those portfolios to combine them together to in the end cater to different investors based on their liquidity, risk, and time preferences.
Okay, all right. So now we're gonna start with some random questions from the people from chat. So there is gonna be a question about those real world assets like stocks. So you are working with Dinari. Yeah, that's correct. So there's gonna be more of these assets, and when, if it's gonna be.
We released last week those first few assets. You can expect in the next few weeks we're also gonna launch a couple indexes, probably the SPY and the QQQ. Those are the ones that have most demand. But then if any of you wants a specific asset, we can make it happen. We can work with Dinari to make it happen. We're just prioritizing the ones that we feel they have the more demand at the moment. And then our goal, as I mentioned before, is to bring all the best assets from all the macro asset categories. For example, we also announced gold via Tether Gold and some Paxos as well. We have bonds and we have access to T-bills through Mountain Protocol, through USD Plus, and Backed will be here soon as well. So we're going to keep offering more and more of these assets.
Okay, so what's going to happen if something bad will go in Dinari? So what's with our assets? I know that they got custody of this, of some of them. Yeah, like there is like backing is in Dinari. So what's happened when they will go bankrupt or something like that?
Great question, and I love this kind of question because it shows that you make your due diligence and you are serious. Because even the quality of the questions already in this space is really good. It's a breath of fresh air. So thank you. Yeah, Dinari is in the process of setting up this remote vehicle, and it's going to be ready this September. But already the Dinari assets, the D shares that are called, they're already isolated from the underlying assets from Dinari. So in case of a bankruptcy, they will be totally isolated. So no matter what happens to Dinari, your shares that represent your tokens, your equities of Coinbase or Nvidia are safe and they map one-to-one.
Okay, that's good. That's safe. So the next question, it's gonna be about your financing rounds, because is there gonna be another one? Because there is something like Binance Labs was mentioning you in some of the articles. So do you wanna get some more money and some more investors?
I mean, last round we raised last year, end of last year, we raised 7 million from a combination of investors like Parafy, and there were two different rounds, one in the summer and one a bit later. In total was 7 million, and we had investors like Parafy, Spartan, Robot Ventures, few angels like Santiago, the Blockworks guys, etc. And in this fall, beginning of winter, we plan to raise our Series A, and that should be the last raise for the company and foundation to set things up before our potential token listing, and then giving total control over governance for the community. That you can see in our documentation. We have the plans for progressively decentralizing the control of the DAO.
All right. So in the first phase of the locking assets to get some Engen points, they could give you some Kinto token. So is there gonna be some more use case for this Engen points in the future, or this was just for the Kinto tokens?
I mean, it still has a use right now that is really important. Right now, if you have Engen tokens, you are mining more Kinto. Depending on the tokens you have, you're mining 15 to 20% more Kinto than someone that didn't participate in Engen. So you're going to have that permanent benefit. And as I said, our mining program lasts for 10 years. And then when we release some unique features, I mean, we will always keep in mind that these supporters, the people that hold Engen, have been with us from the beginning. So when if we do something special with NFTs or some kind of promotion or some kind of giveaway, we will always make sure to treat our Engen holders right, because they are the ones that have been with us from the very beginning.
Okay, so who do you think is your biggest competitor in the space, and is there any other chain or L2 that's gonna require all this KYC and privacy stuff like you?
Yep. There are a lot of competitors, and at the same time, there are few competitors. There is no other layer 2 that has the same features as we do. And I think we're defining a new category, because on one side, for many years, you have had all these companies and financial firms trying to create their own centralized blockchains that they are totally permission. Something like Onyx from JP Morgan, or even Provenance, I would say, is our competitors in one sense, but they are totally permission, and only approved participants can participate on the chain, create assets, etc., etc. You need to get whitelisted even to be a developer. While on Kinto is still permissionless. The only thing is there's this rule in the network that the nodes enforce that you have to go through KYC. You can pick your KYC provider, etc., but Kinto doesn't make any decision. While on Provenance or these other permission chains controlled by banks or financial institutions, they decide who gets in, who gets out. Then on the permissionless side, I would say Base, because of their brand and because of the amount of wallets, it's a competitor. It's not a direct competitor because they don't have this feature. So even if they try to onboard institutional capital, because they don't have all the participants KYC, still they can suffer problems. Like, for example, someone can send you ETH from Tornado Cash, and that's an account, and that happened to the BlackRock Beetle Fund on Ethereum, but that cannot happen on Kinto, and Base cannot do that because either you have done it from block 0 from the start of the chain, or you cannot add it later. But of course, there is going to be always, for example, a stock on chain that we launch with Dinari. Coinbase is going to launch it as well. But the difference on Kinto is all the users, all the products are inside this world of Kinto where we have all the security measures in place, and then inside it's much easier to compose them, because for users they only have to KYC once, and then they can access all these protocols. Like, for example, on Ethereum right now, if you want to access different RWA protocols like Maple, Centrifuge, Ondo, you have to KYC with each one of them, and that also means that it's really hard to compose those assets because each one of them has a really different KYC provider, and on chain you cannot compose them if you're a developer. But on Kinto, we give you at the solidity level with one line of code. You can say, okay, this asset, this token that I'm developing is only going to be available to people in this country, in Spain or in Poland, and you can do that with one line of code, and it's already free for developers. The KYC and email, you don't need to pay for any of that, but it's already given to you. So I would say that's the main difference, and there is no direct competitor. We compete with everyone else, with every other layer 2 in a way, but we are not chasing this game of really growing really quickly with even using Tokenomics and these kind of things. We are in here for the long haul, and we are taking a much more mature and measured approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. But when we see all these L2s, there is 20, 30 of them. Arbitrum still has a really nice TVL. Base has a really growing user base, and every other one is like ghost chain. So what's your marketing strategy to compete with them and to attract user? What are you gonna do to not end like the other L2?
Yeah, as I said, we want to create this different frame, and it's like, okay, we are the safe place, and this is where institutions are coming to do Kinto. And then, as I said, during September, we're going to announce these couple partners that are going to join Kinto, and then use that as a springboard to really propel this narrative that this is where banks, financial institutions, Wall Street firms, come to do things on chain. And then this will show retail that if in reality they want to do something that is really secure and have peace of mind, if it's good enough for this financial institution, it's probably really good also for retail. We're going to use that to differentiate ourselves from anyone else. And then regarding TVL, I think we're really early. Yes, Arbitrum, I mean, we're building on the Arbitrum Stack. So we talk really often with the Arbitrum folks, and we're really happy to be part of the Arbitrum family. We also just recently got a grant for them. But the space is still really, really small. It's only, I think all the layer twos only have 50 billion. And the amount of assets under management in traditional asset management is north of 100 trillion. So if we can onboard some of these institutions on chain, the moment they deposit some capital, it's gonna quickly catch up to these values. The problem is, like, as I said before, we have been talking with some of the institutions for 6-7 months, many meetings. We have to pass many compliance checks, many technical checks, many due diligence checks, many on us also personally. So it's not going to be quick. So for people that are looking for something quick, Kinto is not even if, I've been building in the open for many years now, 7, 8. So we are really aligned with this decentralized ethos and as permissionless as possible, while trying to make the compliance guys happy to onboard these mature financial investors. But we are not in a rush to make it happen, and we're not going to compromise our security for it.
Okay, all right. To be honest, I was really skeptical at first when I was digging into your project, but all the explanations are quite nice, and I'm starting to like it more. Your project, yeah, it's going good. So I was reading about some insurance that you're gonna have built in your chain. Can you tell a little bit more about it and how it's gonna work? Where you will get money for this insurance?
Yeah. Basically, when you sign up on Kinto, after you've done the KYC, you create your Kinto wallet, and the moment you create the wallet, you get this insurance. And we launched it a month ago in collaboration with an insurance provider, Bridge. Basically, after you create your wallet, you get up to $2,500 cover against smart contract hacks on the Kinto wallet, or some scam or some drag, but meaning that they take your assets away from you, from your wallet, and that is covered by default. And then you can increase your coverage by using Kinto tokens, and you can get up to 100K, or if you want a custom quote above that, we can also make it happen. But every user is covered up to $2,500 by default, and then the rates, I think, are really user-friendly if they need more coverage than that.
Okay, that is interesting. So maybe now talk a little bit more about your token, because that's the interesting stuff for the Degen, for sure. So I see that you've got on your website 2 charts with token distributions. The first one is initial, and the second one is final. And I was talking with also other Degens from the Discord, and you did some voting, you did some changing. Can you tell us a little bit more? How does it look like for now?
Yeah, the main goal of the token is to distribute control over the network, and hopefully that the token holders are able to capture all the upside of Kinto. So that's why we're doing this. The thing, also talking a bit also high level now everyone is really against tokens or utility tokens, because the regulation has been really, really bad, honestly. So that's why it has been really difficult to actually legit products to provide value because of the regulation in the US. Hopefully in the next few months after the potential elections, then things change, and then new regulation and new clarity, and then you will start, because there are a lot of legit projects, like Synthetics, Aave, Maker, that have a lot of revenue. They have not been able to, although Maker in the last few months has appreciated, they have not been able to deliver this value to token holders mostly because they cannot distribute this directly in the forms of dividends. You can do it in forms of token buybacks. But as long as there is some clarity, I expect the good projects that have revenue that have real users, have real traction to be able to deliver more tokens, more value to the tokens. Right now, people only care either about tokens or Bitcoin. Say everything else is a scam. And I understand the sentiment behind it, but it's important to look a bit deeper and think about the why that sentiment stays there. Then talking about our distribution, initially we have around 55% to the community, then 25% to investors, already including the following round that we haven't done yet, and 20% to advisors. But the most important part about the community breakdown is that it includes this mining program that is going to last for 10 years. And basically every day, every block, we are giving tokens to the people that have capital on Kinto, and also to the developers that are building capital on Kinto. In our documentation, you also have a lot of detail about the mining program and how does it work. But basically, the more capital you deploy, the more time you leave the capital on Kinto, the more tokens you mine.
Okay, that's a really interesting approach. And there's gonna be like this small inflation. It's gonna be like 5%, yeah, something like that.
It's a maximum. I mean, so far it's disabled. We don't plan to use it in the first year, but it's just as the ecosystem grows, you can imagine that there may be the treasury may need more tokens to cover some potential initiatives. So that's why we left and all this is in the smart contracts code public. So the governance will be able to activate this inflation if they need it, and token holders vote for it.
Okay, so I can see in the docs that TGE was already done. Is it true?
Yeah, but separate here because some people understand different things by TGE. TGE, we took it as literally the token is deployed, the token is active on Kinto, and people can already get it on their wallets by mining it. The thing is, like, the token is not transferable yet because it's not listed, but we plan, and you can see in our governance docs, you can see the steps that we are taking to make sure that the token has value, because we are delivering real value to users. So once we did our launch program, we asked for the community and we put this proposal together. Okay, what are the traction and the requirements that we need to meet in order to make the token tradable? Because the first thing that should happen, I don't want to get, and it's the same with my previous project, I made exactly $0, and here I want to make zero. If there is no real value being delivered, I don't want to create a token, because I don't want to create something that doesn't have value and only people that are looking to extract it is just, okay, when it gets listed to sell it. No, so we put this requirement that we are not going to list until we get 100 million in TVL, until we move the roll-up to a stage 1 decentralization to ensure it's owned by the users, and also until there is enough float of the token, because I don't want also, like most of these tokens launched this year, that is like high FDV, low float, so people that buy the first day, then they only see is the chart going down for years and years, and we want the opposite. And also, to provide context, last year when the last valuation we raised was at 100 million, we're going to try as hard as we can to raise at to list at a reasonable valuation, so people, our users that have been with us from the beginning, our investors, and even the team, it's not obvious for them. It's like, okay, because many projects, what they do, they raise at 100 and then they do TGE at 1 billion, so everyone wants to exit right away. But if, let's say, this project will or any project in theory in general raises at 50 million or 100 million, but then list at 150 million, and they have real traction and they have a team and they have the funds to continue developing, it's not going to be obvious for investors to exit with just a 2x or a 3x or stay, because this has the potential to go to 200 million, 300 million. So it's not such an obvious decision for everyone to sell the moment the token is listed.
Okay, so that's going to be, I think, interesting question. Have you started vesting for team and advisor from the TGE, or are you going to start it from the time that the token is going to be there's going to be real TGE and it's going to be transferable?
We debated about this, but we thought the first thing was to start like from this summer, because the team has done a lot of work and it's going to keep. But we have a 4-year, the typical startup vesting 4-year vesting with 1 year cliff, and then the token listing is not gonna take. It's gonna take less than a year. Our calculation is gonna take probably less than around 3 quarters since we did the actual creation of the token, and then the team is still gonna be locked at this point. Investors are gonna be locked, and the thing is, the people that are gonna be able to sell first are all the people like you that are in this chat that are already users of Kinto. The people that are mine are gonna be able to sell the first, before any team is going to be able to sell, before an investor is going to be able to sell, or at least at the same time, because an investor from the same round will still be unlocked. But no investor is going to be able to sell before you, and I can promise you that.
All right. So when do you think it's going to be transferable, when you will meet all those requirements?
Yeah, it's hard to tell because, again, I cannot control the market, so getting to 100 million could be out. But our goal is to around the end of the first quarter next year.
Okay. You cannot control the market, but you can control how many builders there is gonna be, and you can attract them. Sure.
Yeah. That's our goal, is to, and now with these institutions and the initiatives that we have in the works, our goal and our belief is that we can get to that number, to this 100 million by Q1, then do the listing afterwards.
Okay. So can you tell us why did you choose Arbitrum Stack to build your L2 and not Optimism, or just build everything by yourself? Yeah,
it's really interesting. Actually, we started on Optimism, and you can see I wrote a blog post of why we made the switch to Arbitrum. I mean, technologically, they are really similar. I think Arbitrum is a bit farther ahead. And then also in the fraud proofs was a bit ahead on the decentralization front, and they are also ahead on TVL, and is a lot more community oriented, friendly, while Optimism is a bit more idealistic. But the final decision for us is because it was a lot easier to communicate and talk and get support from the Arbitrum team than the Optimism team. I think Optimism team at the time, probably they were really busy with Base, getting that action with Base, and also from a cold analytical mind, it may make sense to go with Arbitrum because Optimism already had Base, and our goal is to be kind of like the more institutional blockchain inside the Arbitrum family.
All right, that seems fair. So you have DAO, and you put some governance there, and why do you like when you see all the projects, almost all of them in a crypto, and DAO mostly doesn't work? There is like maybe a few examples that it's really something nice working, like in Aave, for example, and everything else it's mostly just crap. So why do you think that it's gonna work in your L2, in your project?
I recommend everyone reading it the way we have designed governance, because basically, I think most DAOs, most governance, they ignore how elections have worked in the real world in many thousands of years, and all the learnings, all the hard learnings, and there is a lot of voter apathy in governance. Basically, almost nobody votes, and then the people that vote can actually be bought one way or another. The way governance works in Kinto is totally different. Token holders are gonna be able to elect 9 representatives to become the protectors of NEOs of the chain. And then these NEOs are the only ones that are going to vote on proposals. So every year, basically every 6 months, there's going to be some NEOs that are going to be up for election. And then token holders are going to vote for these representatives. And these representatives are going to be working closely with the foundation. They're going to have this paid position. They know, if they have deep knowledge about the ecosystem. And they're going to be active on every single governance proposal, and they're going to make sure they represent the will and desires of the token holders.
So how much of the power are you going to transfer to the DAO, and when will it happen that to make it work in a 100% as you want it to?
Yeah, we have there are several phases, because of course there are security and practical concerns on doing this. So we're going to do it slowly, but you can see there are 3 different phases in our documentation that we're going to go through. In the first one, there is a security console. Then there is the governance is going to have control of some of the main contracts, like the treasury of the protocol, and then later, absolutely all the main contracts of the protocol will be controlled by governance. But until the protocol is mature enough, the technology is mature enough, and the governance itself has been tested properly, we are not going to give it like 100%, but you can see the requirements and the steps to get there. And if you have any feedback, please feel free to let us know.
Sure, if there's gonna be something that I can add, but I don't think so. It's more like work and focus for the people that have, I think, experience in it. We degens, we know just how to attract people maybe, and then how to make a token worth to look into, and projects too. So I think that those are all the questions that I have, and maybe one more. Yeah, how many people do you have in team?
We're a really small team because we want to stay lean, and we have the belief that the 2 bits a team, and it comes from my background of Y Combinator. It's like I've seen the teams that succeed, and even WhatsApp, go to a $1 billion business with really small but highly talented team. So I'm really lucky to have to work with really high skilled individuals on a daily basis. But we are like only 5 people full time, and then another 5 people part time. So 10 people total.
Okay, that's good, because sometimes when we were talking with this gaming project, there was like 50 people, and you need to have like really huge financing to cover all the expenses. That's
exactly.
Great. Yeah. Okay, so maybe one question that is not related to the project but to the industry, and you are inside it, you know what's going on the background, you know the devs, you know the other projects. So can you tell us what is currently hot in the crypto space, what you talk about when you are on the meeting conferences, what is next, like a trend in crypto? What do you think?
Yeah. I would say right now in the summer, what is hot? Nothing. A few months ago, what was hot, it was the risk-taking narrative, liquid risk-taking, and now with Karak, and then science. Biotic now, Babylon, also on Bitcoin is the new theme currently that make it. But in the last few months, it was all Athena, and the liquid risk-taking narrative dominated 90%, and then the way to take more advantage of those through things like Pendle is probably what most people was focused on. Also, Hyperliquid has been a good story the last few months, and their Bolt. Right now, I think the Bitcoin Babylon is a narrative that may take steam, and then RWS Ace is a boring, but the BlackRock Beadle fund is something that in the institutional circles gets talked about a lot, because they have right now 300 million or 400 million already tokenized in Ethereum, and it's working, and they have support for USDC. So it's a boring thing, but it's kind of like their first, and things, and other institutions are looking at that and are looking for ways to get their strategy on chain, and that's why we're having conversations with these financial firms.
Okay, and can you tell us what is your favorite meme coin in the crypto?
Regarding meme coins, the one I hold right now, this is not investment advice, is Popcat. And if you're interested in memes, one thing I recommend you to follow, if you don't already, is Murad on Twitter.
Yeah.
I think he provides some of the best advice for trading meme coins.
Yeah, he's really deep into meme coins. All right, so that's it from us. Is there anything you want to add that maybe I haven't asked you about, and it's really important to share with the community?
Murad is an advisor too, an investor, seed investor in Kinto. No, I think that's it. We're also really friendly. We have our Discord. I see also here some of our supporters. Thank you for being a supporter since the early days. And if you have any question, I mean, we're totally open. We're totally transparent. The whole team is DOS, so you can find all of our identities. And we hope this gives also assurance to people, because we all have been working in really known institutions, and we are not here to to be here also only for a couple of months, create this project, make it a success one day, and then disappear. We are here for the long haul, and we know this is going to take years and years. And we're really excited about this transition to on-chain finance, and we want to make it happen.
All right, that's great. So if there's going to be something more that we want to ask you, we will go to Discord, because sometimes there is a question that came up when we think about this, when we think about the answers, when we listen to this again. So yeah, we're going to jump into Discord and then talk more about it. And now I just want to thank you that you came, you share your time, you share your knowledge with us. Really, really appreciate that. And yeah, great to have you.
Thank you. I think this was one of the best spaces or Discord EMS I ever done. You guys have done due diligence and asked good questions. So it was a pleasure.